It's our last day in Prague. Again, I'm at the library. It's called Connections. Coffee, books, and more. Lots of conversations take place here. Some casual, some quite deep. All right, chapter 26, we're making some headway. Woohoo! Verse 1, when Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, as you know, the Passover, it's 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. Jesus, he wasn't hiding the fact that his crucifixion was around the corner. I mean, he talked about it. Somehow, the disciples, I don't know, they kind of either didn't believe him or couldn't understand it, whatever. But anyway, verse 3, the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas. And they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. Now you have to hold that thought. They want to arrest Jesus secretly, which they accomplished, but not during the festival. Which festival? Of Passover. Well, you'll reflect on that a little bit later. While Jesus was in Bethany, the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. Worth just pointing out again that in Hebrew culture, you didn't sit at a table. The tables were very low to the floor, and you reclined on pillows and couches. So that's where Jesus was. And so when this woman came in, his head was fairly accessible, as was his feet. And then this is verse 8, when the disciples saw this, they were indignant. You know, that's something that I've experienced with religious people. And I am one, and I can tell you I get indignant. Usually I get indignant for no good reason. When they saw this, they were indignant. Why this waste, they asked. This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. Well, John describes this situation, and it's Judas who asked this accusing question. And then John adds to it, Judas was a thief. He was a keeper of the treasury of the disciples, and he took from it freely for his own use. Okay. It's true. This perfume could have been sold at a very high price. Other of the Gospels indicate that it was a year's wages. That's a lot of money. And this kind of perfume would have been purchased, not like Versace or Dior or any of those, those Macy's commercials that come on around holidays. They're just ridiculous commercials for perfumes and so forth. Well, okay, this was generally this kind of ointment, this kind of perfume was reserved for dressing a dead body, and its potency was to compensate for the smell of decomposition. All right, verse 10. Aware of this, and what I think these disciples were asking themselves, I mean, they weren't making this big production, but they kept asking themselves around you know what I'm talking about. I think they didn't really want to say it out loud, but Jesus was aware, and he said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She's done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will have with you always, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly, I tell you, whenever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." We don't know who she was. We only know what she did. And wherever the gospel is read, her act and her memory has to come up. A couple of things about this particular episode. In addition to the anointing by this woman, the Jews, they were schemers. These chief priests and Pharisees and Sadducees, the Jewish religious ruling class, because that's what they were. They were actually, I was going to say they were ruthless, but they had more than one or two opportunities to do Jesus in, and they didn't. So, however, I'm going to see in a few, actually just a few verses, they when they were ready, they pulled the trigger, and they schemed. Okay, I think religious people have to be careful not to be schemers. Okay, and then the act of this woman. I have once or twice heard this passage preached from, and one of the implications is, go big or go home. Bring a really big gift to Jesus. And I'm not sure that's really the point. The point is, this woman had great love for Jesus, and I don't know exactly how to approach it, so I'll just be blunt. The size of this gift was not the point. It was a sacrifice by this woman, no doubt, because, as I said before, this perfume would have been held in reserve for her burial. And she had poured it out on Jesus' head. The aroma filled the room, don't you imagine? And so you can make all kinds of connections with meaning in this, but sometimes we get so bound up looking at the trees, we don't see the forest. Well, in my opinion, the forest is two things. Jesus honored and regarded this woman not because of the cost of her sacrifice, but because she was willing. The disciples said, you know what, we could have given that money to the poor, a year's wages to the poor. We could have distributed that, and think about that. That's 365 days worth of whatever they needed. Jesus said, well, yeah, okay, but you'll have the poor with you always. You won't have me always. There's so much to take from this, but my brain is just going like this. Don't miss the point. And while there are lessons to learn from this, what's the point of the story? Jesus made it clear. This woman was preparing his body for burial. What he had told the disciples, that I don't think that they somehow They didn't register it. He's this is part of that. She's preparing my body. She's preparing me for burial. You don't bury live people, you bury dead people. Okay. Well, verse 14. Then, this moment seemed to trigger one of the 12 called Judas Iscariot. And he went to the chief priest and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" Well, they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. 30 pieces of silver is generally regarded as the cost of buying a slave. And it would not have been the, A-class slave. This is an average kind of slave, and we can't even connect with that because the only thing we can call on in terms of slavery is what we have been taught about the days before and during the Civil War, before the proclamation of emancipation. Well, okay. Judas essentially sold Jesus for the price of a slave. I think it was Isaiah who prophesied this. And then he started looking for the best time, the best opportunity to hand him over to the Jews. In verse 17, on the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, which, by the way, would have been Thursday, according to most Bible scholars, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "What do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" I love how Jesus responds. He replied, "Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house." Like Jesus had somehow already made arrangements, maybe, or else he'd prepared this homeowner to open his home. So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them and prepared the Passover. Verse 20, when evening came, and this would have been Thursday evening, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." That's not your normal table talk. In verse 22, they were very sad and began to say to him one after another, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord." Among these would have been Judas. Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me." It's kind of a little bit cryptic, but they all watched. The Son of Man will go just as is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi." Jesus answered, "You have said so." Which is another way of saying, you're exactly who I mean. Verse 26, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." This part of the Passover meal was not new, except for how Jesus had explained it. That was not in the Passover script. And I'm going to come back to this next time and talk a lot more about that. But for now, I'm done. See you next time on SoulCare with Stevie Boy.